A lot of the work that we do, particularly walking into predominantly white spaces, I think happens on the back end because there's so little of us in the actual space.
You look at your hair different. You look at your legs different. You look at your thighs different. Like, you literally look at every aspect, your face, your nose, like the way that you talk, your lips, everything. And you don't even realize that you're doing it.
On top of not looking like the other people, like economically, I was not like the other students there. So it's another thing I'm judging, that I do not have blonde, long hair, that I cannot possibly afford the clothes they wear. I'm not wearing Vera Bradley.
Welcome to Season 2 of Students of Mind, the podcast where we aim to normalize conversations about mental health. Last season, we connected you with experts in the field of mental health to provide an understanding of topics and illnesses that may not have been easily accessible. This season, we will continue our learning journey together by not only speaking to experts, but also by listening to the voices and stories of real people who are living, surviving, and even thriving, while also facing challenges with their mental health in their everyday life. This season, we want to hear your stories to get the full truth of what it's like to manage one's mental health and navigate living with mental illness. My name is Jayde, and today's episode is going to look at what the experience is like as a Black woman in predominantly white spaces. First, we have Dr. Joy Cox here to speak about the effects that being in predominantly white spaces has on Black women and what is being done about it. The second part of today's episode will be a bit different. I will be joined by two former classmates of mine to have an open discussion about our experience attending an all-girls, predominantly white institution and how it affected the ways we view our bodies and our mental health in general. I hope by listening to the show, you're able to learn something new and gain some encouragement through hearing our experts and listening to the journeys of our guests. However, this show is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have about your condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on the Students of Mind podcast. Today's first guest is Dr. Joy Cox. Dr. Joy received her PhD in communications from Rutgers University in 2018 with an emphasis on organizational communication and its impact on marginalized groups. Her work centers around social justice advocacy and the intersectionality of race, body size, accessibility, and health within the context of body acceptance and fat liberation. Dr. Joy is the host of the Fresh Out of the Cocoon podcast and author of Fat Girls in Black Bodies. Welcome, Dr. Joy. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we get into the topic of today, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Joy Cox. I'm currently employed at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. I am a fat, Black, cisgender woman, and a lot of my work revolves around those identities. And so, as a researcher, I received my PhD from Rutgers University in 2018 within the area of communication, where I focus on identity. And more specifically, how people with stigmatized identities kind of navigate the world around them.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen your work and how it revolves around all of those things. So I think it's really cool that you're able to incorporate all of your identities within your work. So today I wanted to talk about the experience that Black women have in predominantly white institutions, and then more specifically, like body image experiences in predominantly white institutions.
Mm.
But first, can you talk about your experience in predominantly white institutions and what that was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I don't know if I necessarily have a peculiar experience, but I grew up in Philadelphia where, as a child, I was surrounded by predominantly Black people. And so that's what I seen in my neighborhood. That's what I seen when I went to school. And that's not to say that there weren't other races that were present, but Black people stood out the most to me. When I was about 7 years old, my mom moved me and my sisters to another part of Pennsylvania that was predominantly white. So I spent a good amount of my time then being in a different type of audience. And I think from there, you learn rules, you learn how to navigate life around that. And so transitioning into a predominantly white institution, you kind of already come with a set of tools that you know that you need in order to kind of move around and I guess access your own sense of freedom. And so for me, I kind of came into school with that. I'm a non-traditional student, or was a non-traditional student. So I decided to go back to school at the age of 25, which was a little bit different, but the tools worked. Still the same, right? And I still had to find ways to find peace and safety and all of those things, because I think those were the things that weren't necessarily as readily accessible to someone like me, specifically dealing with matters of identity, race, body size, and all of that stuff.
So, speaking more broadly, what specifically are the ways that it can be difficult, distressing, seemingly unsafe for Black people to exist in spaces that are predominantly white?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about that term like microaggressions, I think you find out very quickly that they are everywhere. And I think that for Black people, aside from physical safety, I think our mental and our emotional safety, those are the things that become most threatened in predominantly white spaces. And I think a lot of that really just flows from that sense of ignorance that everybody is like, the majority, and everybody operates like the majority does, and how the majority sees particular lives and lifestyles and culture. There's just an expectation that if you are in the space of the majority, or in this space of white people, that you think like they do, that you behave like they do, and there's a lot of stigma that comes along with that, right? So how they see culture, how they see people who may identify with the Black experience, what that means. And so I think there's a lot of girding up that you have to do emotionally and mentally to kind of come out of those situations as unscathed as possible. And microaggressions is like right where it sits, right? So from people reaching for your hair, people asking you weird questions about, I don't know, how you upkeep yourself as though it's different than everyone else. And I think like those things over time really do take a toll on your mental health. You get tired of answering silly questions. You get tired of, having to tell people don't touch my hair and things of that nature. And so, yeah, I would speak more to the emotional and I guess mental um, stability that tends to get rocked in predominantly white spaces, institutions, not exempt from that.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I started my education in a predominantly white space. So I went to a private all-girls school, and when I first went there, I was probably like one of 3 Black kids in my class. And so for me, it was like since I grew up in that space, it was so normal, and I was used to and was like expecting to have the types of interactions I was having in school in normal life just because it was so normal.
Right.
So it was just an interesting experience for me to go into college, even though I don't go to a predominantly white institution, but Black people aren't the majority. And seeing the ways in which Black people have to adjust is interesting because I didn't have to do that because I grew up with it.
Right.
So yeah, it's really interesting the like conditioning it does in preparing you because a lot of spaces are predominantly white. So
Right.
I feel like it definitely has prepared me or taught me how to manage myself in those spaces. So you were talking about the fact that it's more of like a mental and emotional toll that being in these types of spaces can take on Black people. So can we go into that a little more and talk about specifically for Black women, what are some of the like mental health implications that we're seeing from being in predominantly white spaces and predominantly white institutions?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that you hear all the time as it relates to higher education is imposter syndrome. The first idea is that you're not good enough, that maybe you're here by mistake. And I don't think that, the presence of white people, and in some ways the presence of white mediocre thought um, inhibits that, right? The idea that you are the outsider, people treat you like you are the outsider. They ask questions as though you are still the subject that's being researched, as opposed to the researcher who is now taking up space in the institution. So I think imposter syndrome is one of those things that stick out the most. In addition to that, I think there's also when we talk about the emotional strain that's associated with code switching. That's another thing. This need to have to hide who you really are, hide your culture in a lot of ways, comes from that space of needing to code switch, not being seen as less intelligent because you don't talk like everybody else, or you don't practice or behave like everybody else. And then I also think low self-esteem could be another toll that impacts black women. We're still in predominantly white spaces. We're not seen as attractive. Our bodies are not valued. They're not seen as something to be revered, and in some ways they're not seen to be normal. And so um, you know I think those three things are are definitely things that I can personally attest to, maybe being at the top of the list when we talk about the implications of what it means to be a Black woman trying to navigate predominantly white spaces.
And thinking about like research on this, is there research being done on this in order to kind of find ways to like make these spaces better equipped for Black women and just Black people in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably a whole body of research that's been done in a number of different avenues, contexts, and ways that highlight the difficulties that Black women and Black people as a whole have in transitioning in predominantly white spaces. Now, whether or not those come with recommendations or that institutions actually pay attention to those recommendations is something totally different. But for sure, there's research that's being done around those issues. In my line of work, there was when I was looking at the issues around body image, there were pieces that were coming out about how Black women, in some ways, or Black girls, didn't have the same impact. Negative impact wasn't on them as it related to body image when they were surrounded with their own art, right, or their own body types, because they seen themselves in those types of art displays. But when you take that away and it's just white bodies and white norms, there's this additional pressure that's provided, that then causes them to question themselves, their identities, and how they fit into spaces. And so if I'm doing research around it and other people are doing research around body image, I'm sure that, in a more broader sense, in different disciplines, there's work that's being done as it relates to imposter syndrome, as it relates to code switching, as it relates to, identity in different contexts that Black women, their feelings have been reported as it relates to how they navigate predominantly white spaces.
That's great to hear. That's something that's being actively studied and looked at. Going more into the body image aspect, you talked a little bit about just the difference in body ideals and beauty standards between Black and white women. And I feel like sometimes it comes across that Black women are more body positive than white women, or we don't have that many issues because we're used to being like the curvy ones. So can you talk about like amongst Black women, like what are the ideal or body ideals and beauty standards that exist, and are we actually more body positive than other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that I kind of dispute in my line of work often. The idea that Black women are quote unquote more body positive, or that we're more accepting of the diversity of bodies. And I think that, what we know is diet culture in predominantly white spaces. Um, we take that in subcultures and we just repurpose it to kind of fit our own ideals. And so I think when you talk about the Black experience and you talk about what are body or beauty ideals among Black women in these spaces, it's what you see in the mainstream, right? It's small waist, it's big hips, it's big butts, it's big busts, right? It's about being curvy, no matter what shape you may find yourself in. It's it's the long hair, it's the parts on in the middle, it's all of those things. And so I think that there's just a repurposing of what European beauty ideals in a way that it's functional, like for Black bodies. And so if you are part of the Black collective, you kind of, there's unwritten rules about what makes you beautiful. And your body is not exempt from that. And people want to see you have, a size 4 waist and a size 10 hip. How that's possible, still trying to figure that out, right? Or if you do live in a larger body, right, you should be larger in all the right space, all the right places. And so people are still expecting you to have a slim waist, smaller arms, whatever, all of those things, unblemished skin, right? Right now we see like this fluctuation about, now it's okay for women to have stretch marks, but I was alive during a time when it also wasn't okay for women to have stretch marks, right? And cocoa butter was flying off the shelves, right? Because nobody wanted those marks on their bodies. And so I think that when it comes to Black women, a lot of those ideas still persist, as to how we are supposed to present and look in society. Yeah, none of them are like fat and just chilling, right? Like nobody's just, what I like to say is like fatting in peace. Nobody's doing that. That's still an identity that's very much rejected in the Black collective.
So why is it that this common idea that Black women are more body positive, like where did that come from?
I think it came from white people. And I think the notion is because you see different people within the collective celebrating themselves, and all of those things, and those people don't look like you, right? They don't have the same shapes or bodies as people who are in the mainstream who are doing this work that are white. Then there's this notion that, oh, they accept everybody. It's an overgeneralized statement when the people who actually live within the collective can attest to, like, no, they no, the Black collective doesn't accept anybody, right? Like, or all bodies, should I say? That there's still a standard, that there's still a hierarchy as it relates to body shape and body sizes. But I think a lot of that, which speaks to the importance of why Black people should be doing research about themselves, because when you are the subject of white gaze without context, white gaze without real connection and relationship, conclusions are made about you and about collectives that just simply are inaccurate.
Yeah, that's interesting because I just know that so much of the research that we base everything on is based on white people and not research done on Black people. And like my next question was, has it been researched if this kind of misconception that Black people are more body positive, if that has resulted in like Black women receiving less care for body image related issues or like more eating disorders among Black women
So I think you raise a good question. I'm going to try to frame this, I guess, in a way that, at least the way that I understand it. So one, when we talk about Black people, Black women as it relates to eating disorders, treatment, care, they're already less than everybody else, right? And so to what extent or to what degree research being done on this topic makes it worse for them, it's probably not the thing that's being measured, right? Because you're already at the bottom. Black women already are not being referred to specialists as it relates to eating disorder treatment. What research does say is that doctors are less likely to even ask those questions. And I don't think that that is necessarily tied to how Black women are, how Black girls are as it relates to body image. It's just lack of care, right? Like, it's just somebody somewhere is not doing their job. Somebody somewhere is not looking for signs, and they're not asking questions to look for those signs, right? And so there's this sense of like just not, I guess not having the mind to even check up on those things. And so to that point, I think that when you are already at the bottom, I don't know if people are necessarily measuring, now that we find out that you're at the bottom, how much does this particular thing attribute to you being all the way at the bottom? But what I will say is that within the circles that I'm a part of, the communities that I'm a part of, Black women, fat Black women in particular, are always pushing against this notion, this idea that, the Black community is overall more body positive. The Black community is like all inclusive as it relates to bodies. And a lot of that stems from the fact that we have received care that tells us something different. And that care, that concern, that openness wasn't shared with us from, our own collectives or our own family members and things of that nature. So there's a constant push to re-educate among communities as it relates to that. And I don't know if that has necessarily been captured in data. I haven't personally seen it as it relates to that, but I know that there are a number of people within the community that speak out against that regularly.
That's good to know. I think we just need more voices talking about Black people and eating body related things. I don't think that's talked about enough. Because I know, like, even with me and my eating disorder, even as I had already started eating disorder treatment, it was hard for me to like accept that I had an eating disorder because I had never seen or heard a Black person say anything or express that they had a hard time with food and their bodies. So I think the more Black people and people in not idealized bodies talking about this, the better. So going back to being in predominantly white spaces, how does being in those spaces affect Black women's body image and their perceptions of their own bodies?
So I think that impact probably varies. I think that if you are someone who has a good self concept of yourself, you have a good idea of your own identity and kind of what you're rooted in, I think that you're less likely to be swayed by outside voices. And I think that is whether you're in a predominantly white space or not. So as someone like myself who lives in a fat Black body, who doesn't necessarily belong in either, in the favor of either collective, so to speak, right? Being in a predominantly white space, I'm still dealing with the issues of chairs not fitting me. Being in predominantly Black spaces, I'm still dealing with the issues of chairs not, not being able to fit. But my self concept is rooted and grounded that I know that the problem is the chair and not me. Right. And so I think that, when we start to talk about the influence and the impacts of different spaces and environments, we know that European beauty ideals are like the rule of the day. And we see them everywhere, whether you're at a predominantly white institution or whether you're watching TV at the end of the day, right? Like, you are bombarded with messages about what beauty is and what it's supposed to look like, and all of those things. And I think that we see that how it represents itself or how it shows up in Black communities I mean, now I'm almost taken back a little bit personally, the way that I see Black women, whether it be on YouTube or whether it be on TV, how they shade their noses. Like, we are really operating and working hard to create these smaller noses and these bridges that like really don't really don't exist. And I think about that, right? Because what is it about our nose that's offensive, or what is it about our nose that isn't, that's not seen as beautiful? And so I think that, you know, the impact of being in these predominantly white spaces, we see it show up. Sometimes it's a lot heavier for some people than others, right? And so, you know, if that ranges from someone who refuses to wear their natural hair outside, someone who, you know, who obsesses over what it means to live in a smaller body, you know, because of who they see in front of them, to, you know, to something that might be a little bit less egregious, right? It might be you going to a tanning bed. It may be, you know, different activities like that. But I think that ultimately varies based on the self concept that an individual has, and how they see themselves, and what they're rooted and grounded in. Because I think that the one thing that minority groups or marginalized populations do deal with is this meshing of, you know, the meshing of like white culture and like what's trending, right? So the moment something becomes trendy and cool, everybody starts to do it. But then you're simultaneously, right, like playing into or assimilating to European norms and ideals. And I don't think that we always separate those two.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm glad that you just noted that, like, these standards exist in all spaces, not just predominantly white spaces. I think that's an important thing to kind of remember too, that, and that's just validating if there's a Black woman listening that also experiences these body image struggles in Black spaces, and just validating that, like, that's normal too.
Mm-hmm.
And so shifting to kind of like more of like solutions or ways to manage these environments, what are some ways that Black women can keep themselves safe, or take care of their mental health when they're frequently in predominantly white spaces, or just when they're in predominantly white spaces in general?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that if you are a Black woman who finds yourself in predominantly white spaces and you happen to be there alone, um, do the work on the back end, right? So, you know, what's the saying? Like, you stay ready so you don't have to get ready, that sort of thing. Find your people outside of those spaces. Find a way to de-stress. You know, everybody's on social media nowadays. Find you some people who you can follow, who will uplift you, who resonate with the identities that you have, and get strong that way, so that when you step into these other spaces, you are unbothered by the things that you see. Um, you know, I also tell people, you know, pick your fights, choose wisely. One thing that you will find in predominantly white spaces is that microaggressions are everywhere. So there's always a fight, right? But all fights are not worth fighting. And so you got to ask yourself, you know, how much energy do you want to put in a thing before you run, you know, full speed ahead? Um, you know, and then I would also, you know, if you have to carry affirmations around, I know that that's a thing. You know, find you a safe space or a quiet space where you can kind of like slip out for a moment, you know, even if it's 5 minutes, that you can kind of tap into your own strength, because that's always helpful as well. And if there are other people who are your people, find them and connect with them. Find ways to stay connected with them while you are in those spaces that you're in, whether that's an institution or whether that's a job that you work at, because we're all working towards sanity, right? Like, I show up at my job to do my job and get paid, but not to deal with all the other stuff. but if it's if I cannot escape the other stuff, then at least while I'm planning an escape route to get to something better, I gotta figure out a way how I can sustain myself while I'm there. And so, just finding those ways, if there's an ability for you to tap out, if that's listening to music, if that's listening to, a podcast, if that's, texting with friends, whatever it is. But, a lot of the work that we do, particularly walking into predominantly white spaces, I think happens on the back end because there's so little of us in the actual space. And so we're working to reify our identities, our value, our worth outside of those spaces so that we have the strength and the capacity to deal with whatever may come while we're out.
I'm glad you noted that and also glad you noted utilizing online spaces, because I know that there's a lot of Black people in similar situations as me that kind of grew up in mostly predominantly white spaces. And so we don't have those like Black friends that like we developed in childhood, because all of our friends are white because we were always in white spaces. So I'm glad you mentioned going to online spaces to find a Black community, because that has been really helpful for me, especially in this past year. There's been a lot of Black only spaces online opening up, which has been really great.
Mm-hmm.
So great. Lastly, can you tell my audience and I how we can stay up to date with you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find me on drjoycox.com. That's all one word, drjoycox.com. That's my website. I'm also on IG as Fresh Out the Cocoon. I'm on Facebook as Fresh Out the Cocoon. And then I'm on Twitter as Dr. Joy Cox.
This next part of the episode features a discussion between myself and two of my former classmates, Wanjiko and Jordyn. We came together to have an open and honest conversation about our experiences attending our past school, which was and still is a predominantly white institution. We talk about how being in a predominantly white institution affected our mental health and perceptions of our bodies. We talk about microaggressions and the experience of leaving a predominantly white institution. Hi, Wanjiko and Jordyn. Thank you so much for being here. So, for everyone listening, these two guests are very close to home for me. We went to school, for me, from around kindergarten through 8th grade. So yeah, if you guys want to introduce yourselves, we can start with Wanjiko.
Hi, I'm Wanjiko Kahara. I'm a sophomore at George Washington University studying computer science, aspiring software engineer. And yeah, I went to Bryn Mawr with Jayde from 1st to 8th grade before I transferred.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm a junior at Towson University. I'm a mass communications major on the triple track. So I'm doing public relations, advertising, and journalism. In the future, I really want to move to New York and work at a boutique firm, or I'm honestly not sure. I just know I want to do PR somewhere, some capacity. And yes, I went to school with Jayde from 1st to 8th grade as well.
Cool. Okay. So, as you guys know, the topic for this episode is body image. So I thought it was really important to have a conversation about how going to a predominantly white institution has an effect on body image. And then I just thought would be interesting to hear both of your stories about, when you learned about what body image was and like your journey up until now. And just to kind of loosen things up, I talk about this a little bit, but I have been in recovery from my eating disorder for about 5 years now. I've always had like a little trouble with food, especially because I was a dancer. I started dancing when I was 3, and just the culture of the dance world is very body focused. And then going to a school where I was surrounded by mostly white bodies kind of perpetuated and emphasized in my head that my body was wrong. And then really in high school is when things kind of went over the edge and the like really severe eating disorder developed. And which is why another reason why I'm so glad you guys were open to do this. I remember feeling like I was the only one that felt like this when we were in school. And so just to have you guys kind of like speak up and say, oh, like I was going through that too. That's really comforting. And I hope that it makes other people feel like they don't have to kind of stay quiet and feel alone, because clearly we were not alone.
Yeah.
So that being said, I want to first ask you guys about just body image in general. What's your understanding of it, and when were you first like made aware of body image?
I would say I was first made aware of like body image and like my changing body in middle school. Towards like 7th grade, that's when I would actually like be in the mirror and like look at. Actually, I remember that day very well. It happens to like coincide with like going into a predominantly white school. I remember being by my locker, and this other friend of mine said something like, "Oh my God, do you have a thigh gap?" And I was like, oh my goodness, what's a thigh gap? And then from there, I like looked down with our like little blue skirts, and I'm like, oh my God, like I can't see a thigh gap. And she's like, oh yeah, like you're just not skinny enough. And I'm like, okay. And that's when my issues continued from there. But my general understanding of body image mostly is simply how you feel about yourself and your comfortability in your own skin, and looking in the mirror and what you feel, how happy you feel.
Yeah.
I think mine's kind of the same. Honestly, growing up, I didn't really think about body, like growing up, like as far as being at home, didn't really think about body image at all. Like my mom was always really sweet to me. My parent, like my dad was, my grandma, like I didn't really think about it. And I'm an only child too, so I don't have an like older sister or like my older brother's girlfriend. Like I don't have anything like that. It was just me kind of and my like neighbor, and we didn't really like think about that at all. But I mean, I'm sure you all both remember like growing up at Bryn Mawr was hard for me, really hard for me. I was bullied a lot. It was hard. I only had a few friends, whatever. And so for a little bit, high school got better if you guys are wondering, but middle school and lower school were rough. And so I remember the only thing that I like had, like, I felt like I was so out of place in so many different ways. But the only thing that I had was that I was like smaller. I felt like I was like, I felt like I did fit into like that at least. And so I did my best to maintain that from like a young age. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. I didn't even realize that in my mind, like I equated like, okay, well, this, that, and the third, I feel different. This, that, and the third, I feel ostracized, whatever. My body is the one thing that like they can't take, they can't change about me. And so I think that's when I kind of subconsciously started to do that. And then my overall idea of just like body image is just like, I don't think I have a definition. I think it's just, I think as women, as we grow and as we change it, I guess shifts with us, shifts with you and like how you view yourself. But I guess like right now, it's just me looking in the mirror and like how I feel about myself. Like if I get a positive or negative reaction subconsciously from when I look at myself. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree. I think the definition changes from person to person, but also from period of your life to period in your life. So, and I think another thing that is interesting that I want to talk a little bit about is how our families spoke about body image or just bodies in general. I know, Jordan, you said that you're an only child, and that wasn't really something that came up in your house? Wanjiko, I'm wondering how that shows up for you. I know for me, I'm one of a bunch of boys in my family, and they're all athletes. And so it was like body image was like subconsciously something that was always like in the air in terms of like being fit. And then also body image is really hard for the women in my family. Like it's the norm to talk badly about your body for the women in my family. So yeah, Wanjiko, I'm wondering, does it show up at all in your family?
I would say the same thing for me. It'd be the norm that the women would talk badly about their body. And that subconsciously, like, I would get that from my aunts, my mom. I think the phrase that really, like, for years, like, attacked me, that my cousins used to say, like, jokingly, but I would internalize a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. I didn't even have hips. I didn't even understand like that phrase, but I was told that from such like a young age and repeatedly that whatever I'm putting in, I'm about to get fat. So I need to worry about that since I was a child. So it was always a subconscious thing to, oh my goodness, maybe I shouldn't eat that. I'm going to develop hips when I was underweight to begin with. So yeah, family was definitely a huge thing that caused my body image to struggle at a point in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something I've learned is that a lot of relatives don't even realize the weight of the things they say, especially people of an older generation. But when we're younger, we're sponges and we just soak all of that in. Because I remember telling my mom one time, this was like only a few years ago, like when I was in the middle of eating disorder treatment, I was like, Mom, when you talk bad about your body, like that makes me feel like I should be talking bad about my body too. She was like, I didn't even make that connection. So yeah, I think parents and family don't really know the weight of how they treat themselves, of how that has on their kids.
That's so true.
So moving into experiences at Bryn Mawr, so where do I start? Being Black at Bryn Mawr was hard in and of itself. And I think that I felt that, and I think that we all felt that during that time, but I think that there's a lot of it that we didn't really understand while we were there. And so I'm wondering, like, when either memories from when you were there or like looking back now, how did being in that environment affect the way you looked at your body?
I think in every way. And you don't like literally like every way. Like you look at your hair different. You look at your legs different. You look at your thighs different. You look at like you literally look at every aspect, your face, your nose, like the way that you talk, your lips, everything. And you don't even realize that you're doing it. So all of a sudden, instead, my mom always used to tell me that I was my own benchmark, right? So no matter my grades, whatever, I was my own benchmark. When you go to an environment where you're constantly surrounded by people who don't look like you and you already are like a growing up adolescent, like, you know what I mean? That's already hard enough. And as people, we compare ourselves to each other. Like, that's just what we do as people. And when you go into an environment where you will never look like someone, like you will, and that is, and the standard is always the majority. And so you're always trying to fit in. And when you go to a place where you know that you'll never look like them and you're surrounded by people all the time that you will never look like, you don't look at your body as your body. You look at your body as something that will never look or equate to like everyone around you, I guess. And so I think in every way, like you go to the bathroom and your friends are like brushing their hair and you have braids, like, you know, like you go to the bath or you go to like a pool party and everyone can just jump in the pool and you're like, No, like, so it's just like every part of your life, especially as women, is dictated by that. And you're around people who I guess don't have the same like thought processes. I don't know. So I think growing up, everything about being there impacted my body image. Your teachers, because we're all the teachers are white, so the older versions of these girls that you're comparing yourself, you see them every day too. So it's just constantly you're bombarded by this new beauty standard that isn't the beauty standard, but it is in your life because it's what you're primarily surrounded by, and you're just surrounded by that every day, and you're constantly comparing yourself to it.
Yeah. I would completely agree with that. It affected me in so many different ways. Bryn Mawr was a affluent school, I would say, in the least. And on top of not looking like the other people at that time, like economically, I was not like the other students there. So it's another thing I'm judging, that I do not have blonde, long hair, that I'm judging that I cannot possibly afford the clothes there, where I'm not wearing Vera Bradley at that time, and things of the sort. That definitely hit my self-esteem a lot, and I might not have really fully knew that, but I was extremely insecure at my time there.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think it's interesting you mentioned like the socioeconomic component of that, because I remember at a time I was on food stamps while at Bryn Mawr, and that was something I felt like I had to completely like hide. And so yeah, and then we're talking about our bodies, and you're mentioning hair. That was such a huge, it felt like a topic that the white girls love to talk about at Bryn Mawr. Whether it was, can you wash your hair? Can I touch your hair? The way that the white students would talk about black hair made me feel like I shouldn't have this on my head. I remember going home. This was like when I was young, probably in pre-first, and I was like crying at home because I was like, Mom, why isn't my hair laying flat? And then I like didn't realize that there was anything wrong with that. And yeah, so I think like I can laugh about it now because I remember specifically one person. She always used to come up to me and she was like, can I touch your hair? Like, when do you wash your hair? And there's part of me that's like, oh, they didn't know any better, but at the same time, the effect that has on a child's psyche is like life-changing.
Okay, so I remember in lower school, you weren't allowed to have beads in your hair. Like, you were not allowed to wear beads. And my mom found out about that, and she was like, oh, we're putting beads in your hair tonight. And you were going to school with your beads in your hair, and I dare them to say something, like literally.
Wow.
And that was like I just like the fact that we went to a school where black kids can't have beads in their hair, and like Gilman, you can't have dreads. Like, it's just like, come on, like, do they not see the issue with this? And that's the only thing I'll say like about hair, but just like the fact that the school, like, that is a thing that black girls, we wear in our hair. We wear beads, like kids, we wear beads in our hair. And the fact that those were banned, it's just crazy to me. But like, I don't know, but white girls could come to school with their hair wet and do whatever they wanted, but we couldn't wear beads in our hair.
Right.
Just like the little stuff like that that was sprinkled in Bryn Mawr.
Right. I have a lot of questions. I think I just want to talk about some of the things that we experienced at Bryn Mawr that were, now looking back, we can be like, that was racist, and that we didn't understand back then. For me, the first thing that always comes up is being called an Oreo or a panda by like, and again, it's like the empath in me is like, these kids did not know any better, but because they were people in our friend group saying this stuff to us, and we would laugh, but I mean, for me, I know at that time inside I was like, that feels shitty, like that feels horrible to be told that I'm not something, like that I'm not Black, when I literally can't change that.
I literally am Black.
And
literally Black.
and then for me, having like going from Bryn Mawr and then to a school where the majority was Black and still being not considered Black,
Yeah.
that was crazy. So I just want to hear about like some of your experiences that maybe in the moment when you were at Bryn Mawr you realized were racist, or some of the things that now looking back you realize the racism that was like laced into that.
I just felt like no matter what I did, like I was never like right. Like I felt like no matter what happened with anything, it was always my fault if there was a white student involved. Like a white student could come up to me and literally like throw something at me, or like I'm not like that's just like a random example, or like say a mean thing to me or whatever. And it was always flipped back around to like, oh, like what did you do to make her do that? Like every single time. Or every single teacher that was like mean to me. Like I had a teacher look at me and literally go, it's you. It's like always you in one way or another. Like I was, what, 7? And she looks at me and she said that. And I brought it up to a teacher, or like to Miss Nosine, and she was like, well, you probably did something to make her say that. When a student is repeatedly coming to you, like saying, like, I feel this, I feel this, I feel that I'm being treated this way by my peers. I'm feeling like I'm being treated this way by whatever. And it's always like your fault. And I feel like if it were a white student coming up and saying these things, that it was actually, because white students would do that and it would be a completely different response. But when I did it, my little brown face, nothing, you know? And so I feel like just not feeling like I was being advocated for. Like I learned from a very early age that I had to advocate for myself in white spaces because no one else was going to do it for you. Like no one else is going to do it. And I would just like to say this, like about you two, like I know the friend group that you all were in, and I didn't have that pressure. Like I didn't, you know what I mean? I had like my little friend group, and we didn't really have that within. But thinking about who you all were friends, I see where you all are coming from, and I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah, our friend group was hard. Looking back, and I would say I don't remember anything like dealing with like the administration that was specifically racist, but I would say with like the friends that we had, there were times that 2 issues. Colorism definitely came up a lot, like just about being light skinned, and in a way that made me start to like hate myself in a way. The thing is, I'm not even that dark, but I have a cousin who used to bleach, and in middle school I once tried to steal her bleaching stuff, right, because I felt like I was not light enough. And why on earth did I have anything, like not even understanding like the repercussions of any of that? But I was in situations that they would try and make me, also that I'm like African, try and like push me down being African, and like try and like put like African Americans against Africans, be like, no, you're like you're better because you're African, and then other than African Americans, like you're not from here. And I'm just like, okay, well, those are sometimes, but also sometimes I did get the very racist, like, do you live in a hut? Like, do you have like zebras in your backyard? I very much heard those things.
You remember hearing someone asking you that?
Yeah, and I'm like, okay. And I thought these people were quote unquote cool, so I would just internalize a lot of these things that I should have just been extremely rude back. But
yeah, and the thing is, most of that stuff did happen when we were in our adolescence, which is one of the most emotional times for young women. And Jordan, it was interesting listening to you explain your experience, because I remember you being so outspoken when we went to school. And at the time I was like, and it wasn't just you, there were a couple other Black girls who were really outspoken when we were younger. And I was like, scared to do that because I felt like I couldn't. And seeing you guys do that, it was like it was strange to see someone actually advocating for themselves and talking about how they felt in an environment where I felt like, because of how I looked, I literally, like, I wasn't allowed to. So it's just so interesting kind of like having you talk about, especially how your mom like encouraged you to talk about how you were feeling and speak up for yourself. And I just think, I don't know, in hindsight bias, of course, having a parent or a friend of the sorts that would like encourage that type of behavior in more Black students at that young age would be like monumental. Racists are racist, so you can say how you feel and still not get the response that you should get. But I think just the act of being able to do that and feeling like you're allowed to do that is like healing in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I think that I say this all the time, but just like in general, my experience at Bryn Mawr and just in general, like feeling like I was, I guess, like ostracized has just made me such a better person. Like, if I can be honest with you, because I don't want anyone to ever feel like how I felt. And so, like, in every aspect of my life, I try and like advocate for people. It may be annoying, but I just do. It's just who I am. I advocate for people because, like you said, like there are some people who don't feel like they can, and that's why, like, and so I always try to advocate people, and I always try to be like inclusive. So all the things that happened, like I feel like all the things that don't kill us honestly do make us stronger. Like that is something that I really like truly do believe. So even like looking back, like at all of my trauma from Bryn Mawr and all of that, like I'm just like, thank God that I made it through that one, and thank God that I came out on the other side like better, honestly. So I don't know. I feel like that's a good thing about Bryn Mawr, that we did come out better. I feel like in some ways, in other ways not so much, but in some ways,
Yeah.
kind of.
Wanjiko, I guess a question for you. Considering the friends we hung out with, our group was predominantly white. And for me, to be honest, Bryn Mawr was really hard for me because race out of the picture, I just felt like I was like a whole different human compared to everyone else there. And I just felt so isolated, which is one of the reasons why I was like really excited to leave Bryn Mawr for high school. And thinking about the group of friends we were in, I felt even more isolated. But like, it's crazy, like thinking about this because we didn't even have any conversations about the way that we were treated in that group. But I know you were more in contact with that group than I was. Once you left Bryn Mawr, were you able to start to kind of like see the effect it had on you? Did it take a long time? Yeah, I'm just wondering like how that played out for you.
I would say firstly, the best thing that ever happened to me, I thought at the time that it was my mom is doing the worst thing to me, that my move to Kenya was not my decision, by the way. I thought it was the worst thing in the world, but it is the absolute best thing that ever happened for my self-esteem, being thrown into a predominantly Black school. It had its problems. Take out racism and put in sexism, but we are in Africa. But being with Black people and just like people who like embraced it a lot more, because there was no benchmark of whiteness with my friends, I immediately did not feel all this pressure that I used to feel with those friends, that it allowed me to like look back and be like, oh my goodness, I should not have felt this pressure. I should not have been, God, it was really, hair was a huge thing. Like I used to have like janky like straight extensions I would try to put into my 4C hair, that I would not be worrying about that. I would just embrace what I had, and even I am still friends with a couple of them. Like we keep in contact. I've seen a couple of them, and I would say there was another Black girl in that friend group, and I would say I fully only connected with her after I left. And It's been really interesting because we're not super close, but I would say from afar, I feel like I've been watching her like come into her blackness, and like she's probably still very close with that friend group, and I hope they all prosper. But like, you can see the differences of having black friends and just having white people around you that you're judging yourself against, even with like the people you're with, the people you date, and all of that. And it was the best thing leaving for me.
Yeah. What I've noticed is once all of the Black girls in our grade graduated from Bryn Mawr, I just saw like whole new humans like come about. Like it's been like kind of crazy to see the transformation that has happened in all of us. Jordyn, yeah, I'm wondering, because you were there all the way through 12th grade. God bless your soul. How was the transition from that to and you're at Towson now?
Yeah.
How was that
Oh, that's a
transition?
whole different. Okay,
Oh,
so junior senior year, so high school in and of itself was just like, honestly, for me, a breath, like just a breath of fresh air. Like, if I'm being completely honest with you, after eighth grade, like ninth grade came, it was just no, like for me personally, there was no drama. I had the people that I hung out with. Yeah, it was just kind of smooth sailing. And then junior, senior year, all of the Black girls in our grade, we just all became friends. Like, and this had, and in my 13 years being a part of 2018, that had never happened. We had never all just kind of like unified, been like, you know what? There aren't that many of us. We may as well like each other. Like, that had never ever happened. And so junior, senior year, we literally all became like every single one of us. We would sit together at lunch. Like, we obviously like had our different like friends or whatever, but we were unified and we were always for each other, like no matter what. And we have a group chat, all the Black girls from that graduated together, and we talk in it every single day, literally every single day. And we hang out with each other. Well, quarantine happened, but before COVID, we hung out with each other a few times a year. Like, even during college, whatever, we make sure that we stay in contact with each other. So honestly, being Black at Bryn Mawr, once we all like got older, it became a lot easier, if I can be honest with you all. Middle school and before, I feel like we were all trying to find ourselves. And so we didn't really understand the power that we held, because unlike everyone else there, we all did have a common denominator. We were all Black in a predominantly white space. And I feel like if we had capitalized off of that sooner, I think that, and really leaned into that and understood how powerful that was, I feel like we all would have still had struggles, but we would have been able to lean on each other more. You know what I mean? And I feel like that is what happened when we got to high school and got more mature, honestly. And so I will say that it did get easier once I got to high school. It really did. I will say, in terms of like graduating from Bryn Mawr, the community of Black girls that left, we were very strong, and we still are very strong. And so that is good, I feel like. But yeah.
yeah, that's
I'm
good
glad
to
I
hear.
stayed the whole way. Yeah, I'm glad I stayed all the way through. I have a little bit of regrets, like, what if I had gone somewhere else? But I think that it was meant for me to stay, and I honestly can't see myself going anywhere else.
Yeah. Okay, so we've just talked about all the bad stuff. And so I kind of want to shift back to like body image stuff. I'm wondering when you guys started to be able to separate yourself from white people and like the ideal body, and what were the things that helped you, or the things that are helping you in your journey continue to separate yourself from that ideal? And yeah, like how, if you're in a better place today than you were, how did you get to this place?
I think that I'm definitely like on a journey with my own self-image, and I think that if anything, it's gotten worse as I've gotten older. Like, me personally, like even now, I really do have struggles. Like, when I came to college, I gained like a lot of weight, and I didn't realize it until I like took pictures and I saw myself, and I saw pictures of myself in like high school, and I was like, what the hell happened? Like, what in the world? Like, and I went through a really, really toxic relationship my freshman year. It's funny now, like looking back at it, because it was so dumb, but like in it, it was just like awful. And so after I kind of went on a rampage where I kind of like used food and like going out, if you know what I mean, as like my coping mechanism. And then the summer came and I hated myself even more because I allowed myself to kind of like fall into that cycle. And so if I'm honest with you, my like struggle with body image has really gotten worse. Like over quarantine, I lost all of the weight that I had gained in healthy, unhealthy, whatever you may call it, ways. And then now I'm back and I'm struggling now because I'm like, oh my God, I'm gaining that weight back, like whatever. So with me, it's never like when I was younger, it was like my hair, like my skin, my face, whatever. But now I'm pretty comfortable with those things. I like how like I look, but it's really my body that is what irritates me the most, I think I would say. So I'd be lying if I got on here and I was like, my relationship with my body has never been better. Like I'd be lying. Like it's not. And I think that admitting that about myself is what is what is key right now, you know. But as of right now, it's okay. Like it's been better, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, and sorry, I should have framed the question in a different way. Like I don't expect, nor should anyone expect any of us to be like in the optimal place. I sure as hell am not anywhere close to the end of my journey. So yeah, I'm just kind of really just wondering where you are in your journey at this point.
I would say I'm getting better. It's a work in progress. I'm at a better place than some places I've been before. It's definitely a journey becoming. My problems were always a lot with food. I would straight up starve myself. Like, straight up for days. Like, I used to faint sometimes because of a bunch of different reasons. Felt like I wasn't skinny enough. I was actually one of like the last people to realize I had an eating disorder. Like all my friends were like, you have a problem with food, because I went to a boarding school. I lived with my friends. They saw me eat every day, and I'm like, no, I'm fine. I can live off one rice cake today. No, I couldn't. Especially being very athletic, I could not. But I'm definitely getting better at a much better place eating. And I think this probably is about to sound like horrible advice, but what worked the best for me to get to where I am is I literally looked in the mirror and I'm like, I do not want to feel this way anymore. So, hey, you're perfect, you are flawless, and your body is phenomenal. Like, stop tracking your calories. Like, you do not need to be reading the back of everything. It's not a big deal. Just allow it. And we're getting there.
Yeah. I appreciate the honesty, because I think, like, again, like in my journey right now, I'm not near the end, and I think that part of what makes it hard to get in a good place with body image is seeing how many body positive Instagram accounts are out there, and it's like that seems so unattainable. Like, how am I ever going to get to a place where I can look in the mirror and say, I completely love myself and I love every single thing that I see right now? And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, one, it's not a straight journey. It's not going to go all linear. You're going to have up and downs. And two, it's okay to have bad days. I think something that I learned in eating disorder treatment that was really helpful was like taking steps in the way that we talk to ourselves, like not going from like saying you hate yourself every day to I love myself, but saying like I feel okay with the way I look in my body, or saying like I appreciate the fact that my body allows me to hug the people I love. It allows me to go for a walk. It allows me to use my hands to make art. And I think that has been something that has been really helpful for me, is to like take the looks out of it and focus on like what your body literally does for you physically. So yeah, I think acknowledging that this journey is not easy is important. I think I'm wondering, Wanjiko, I know you speak a little bit about an eating disorder. I wonder what the nature of dealing with that is in a different country, because I know you said you were dealing with it when you were at your boarding school. And you were the last one to kind of realize it, which is interesting for me, because for me it was like the opposite. My friends were like, oh, you look great. And I was like, oh, cool. So to see like the difference is interesting. So yeah, can you talk more about what that was like?
I should probably start by saying firstly, I was never like proper diagnosed. My school didn't really they didn't really care about that type of issue.
I would like to interrupt and say, I think a lot of Americans or people who have lived in America for the majority of their life have eating disorders or disordered eating because of the way that we are shown what food could potentially do to our body, the pseudoscience that is thrown in our faces about what's healthy and what's not, and the emphasis on equating health with weight. So I never like discourage anyone from saying I feel like I have an eating disorder, but go on. Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, thank you. Very much more validates what I felt. I would say personally with it they didn't deal with it, they didn't try to deal with it, but that's more because the school had its other issues, and the reason my friends would like bring it up to me is more because there was a different ideal body image there than there was here. It was more a bit like curvier girls, still like, you know, like slim thick, but I've always been just like, well, before my boobs came, but like a stick, like no hips, just no ass, like just straight. So it became more and more and more, and they'd be like, you are literally sticks and bones, can you eat something? And I'm like, no, I'm fine, because Bryn Mawr taught me have a salad. Just have a couple of carrots and I'll be fine. And that's what I do. And they're like, what are you doing? That's not the culture there. The culture is that you're supposed to like fatten yourselves up. Well, not fatten yourselves, but like become a little thicker. That's like beauty standard. So I started not fitting the beauty standard there at all. And they'd be like, you probably have an issue.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the Western beauty standard is blinding, because there are so many other cultures where nourishing yourself and looking like you're well fed is like a sign of like high class and like wealth. It's so interesting. So yeah, I just think it's interesting to mention the fact that, like, if you were at Bryn Mawr for that whole time, there probably wouldn't have been anyone that said anything to you. But being in a different culture kind of like brought that up. I'm so glad that I can talk to you two outside of the context of Bryn Mawr, because during Bryn Mawr I was going through the trauma that I'm healing from today, and I was so dissociated, and I felt like I couldn't experience anyone to the full extent. And so I think I'm wondering, I know one thing about Bryn Mawr was the rigor of the academics. And for me, that caused a lot of stress leaving, because I felt like I had to keep that up even though I wasn't at Bryn Mawr anymore. So I'm wondering, like, what effect did that have on you guys after leaving, if any? Or if it was like nice to not have to worry about that anymore.
No, that wasn't the case for me. My school was as academically rigorous on it, and then I went straight out of that to I'm in engineering school right now, so it still is bad.
For me personally, I went to Bryn Mawr and I realized that I'm not an academic person, like at all. Like, I love learning for the sake of learning, but I don't necessarily love to just I don't like the competition that was at Bryn Mawr. I didn't like constantly like worrying about like my grades and whatnot. So when leaving Bryn Mawr, I was like, I'm going to the complete opposite. Like, I am not going to anything that resembles Bryn Mawr in the slightest. So I came to a public state college. like, and when I tell you, I am so much happier here. Like, at Bryn Mawr, I felt like it was an underlying in everything. Like, oh, what'd you get on this test? Oh, what'd you do here? Oh, what'd you get for this? Like, after every single test, like, oh, would you get on this? Would you get on this? And like part of how people thought of you was your grades. And here it's just like I can just like quietly get A's and nobody cares. Or I can get a B, like, and literally no one cares. And it's just amazing. Like I just feel like I don't come from a very like academic family. I went to Bryn Mawr because it was the best school that like my parents like this is the best school, and we did not go to the best schools, and we have the ability to send you to the best school, and so we're going to do that. And even while I was at Bryn Mawr, like my parents didn't really put pressure for grades on me. Like they were just proud of me for being able to go and thrive in a community like Bryn Mawr. And so the only pressure from like really like grade wise and such was that I put on myself. And I realized that that's not me. Like that's not me as a person at all. And so leaving Bryn Mawr, I have a lot of skills as far as like time management and like organization. So like I'm good at that kind of stuff, but it's just so refreshing to be in an environment where school and academics is not your self-worth as a person, because that's not how I was raised. It's not, so going to Bryn Mawr was a shift for me. So coming here just feels like I'm just a happier person, like regarding my academics, honestly. So yeah, it was definitely, it's better coming here than it was at Bryn Mawr. It makes me wish sometimes that I love Bryn Mawr, but it makes me like realize like it did not have to be like that. Like going to school did not have to be like a competition every single day. And so it makes me second guess if I'm going to put my kids in an environment like that. Because I always thought that I would. And being at a place like this where that's not the only focus, it's just kind of like, do I want to do that to my kids? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned your parents, because that's the same mentality mine had. They were like, we had this horrible experience with going to school. We want to put you in the best school that we can. And I feel like that was the case for a lot of Black students at Bryn Mawr. I get it, but at the same time, I think in our experience, I think this will kind of help us with our kids be like, we can find a school that has a balance. We don't have to go all the way to the extreme of getting our children away from all the other Black kids in the city, and putting them here. So I do think that there are a plethora of positives that come out of being put in that environment. So yeah, I just have like a last two questions. I'm wondering if you guys had people in your lives that kind of helped you or are helping you with accepting body image, or who are like on the journey with you and keep you on track with, creating a healthier relationship with your body.
I don't think I actually have that, to think about it. I think it's more, maybe I should get that, but I feel like I'm on my journey by myself. Maybe I should definitely like find somebody, like a benchmark to help me like work on my body image with, but that's definitely like a journey I've been on by myself.
For me personally, like I don't think my mom and I are on the journey together, because she's just like my mom has always just been this like strong, confident Black woman. And she is who I want to be in so many ways, you know? And I think that and my dad, seeing how much my father loves my mom and praises her body, and how much she loves and praises herself is just like amazing to me, you know? And I think that my parents and my boyfriend now, like, I was like, I'm not settling for any less than what Clarence gives Angel. You know what I mean? And so I think that watching the relationship that my parents have with each other and how much he adores her, I think that that is like, okay, he praises and adores and loves the Black woman's body, and she praises and adores and loves the Black woman's body, you know? And just like seeing that with them in a world where Black men want girls that look just like Black girls in terms of their bodies, but they don't want our hair or our skin, like, you know? So being in an environment, like seeing that on like everywhere, social media, whatever, the fact that my body is not necessarily what is wanted, my attributes are, but not my face, not this my soul, whatever, but like at home seeing that there are Black men who love Black women, you know, that's what's really helped me through like my journey personally, and just having a supportive community, So yeah, that's what I feel like. I'm very fortunate and blessed in that way. And I know that's not always the case, and that's not the norm. And so I thank God every day that that's my norm. But that's for me personally. That's it.
Yeah, I agree. Seeing, especially people in older generations, just seeing that modeled is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think also, like with to Wanjiko, something that I find really essential in any type of healing, and I think this comes with just as Black people, we heal really well when we have a community around us. With eating disorders, the community of Black people within that realm is so small and so sparse. And so I think it's really helpful to have someone that you can, if you're struggling, you can talk to them about it. Someone who's Black, because within the eating disorder community, there's just so much. The basis of the research for eating disorders is on white bodies. So it's a difficult place to be in. So yeah, I just want to encourage to like creating a little community for yourself, or like a little support system around this aspect of your life is like really helpful. And I think in general, as Black people in America, and young Black women as well, having a support system is really helpful. So the last thing, I just want to give you guys an opportunity to like plug your social media if you want, or like talk about something you're working on that you want to share with people. Yeah, so you can go ahead.
Well, my social media, everything is my last name, first initial, so Kahara W. Yeah, at everything.
I don't really let people follow my social media.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But I just want to thank you so much for having us. This was a
Yeah.
really great conversation, and it's really good seeing you both.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Students of Mind. This one was really fun to put together and has been in the works for a while, but I'm glad to finally get to share it with you all. I want to give a special thank you to Wanjiko and Jordyn. We talked about some really tender things, and I appreciate and want to acknowledge the vulnerability and courage that both of them showed by being on this episode. I also want to thank Dr. Joy. She's doing some extremely important work right now around race and fat liberation. Don't forget to check out the description to see where you can follow them and see all of their work. In the description, there will also be links to resources related to today's topic and the social media links for the Students of Mind team. Thank you so much again for listening. I hope you learned something new, and I will see you next episode.